welcome to another installment of the Mind Management Mentors podcast. I'm Cuddy Cudworth, the UK's leading mind management coach, self-titled, I'll have you know, Lorwen. And today we've got another big fish. They are coming to the Mind Management Mentors podcast, and I am over the moon to have, and I hope I say this right, Lorwen Neagle.
It's Lorwen, it's Welsh.
Is it really?
Yes.
Oh, so Lorwen
It's like
Neagle.
Roswin. Yeah, Nagel is actually Irish.
Welsh Irish. That's
It's
a
a
lovely
Welsh Irish.
combination.
No, well, that's my husband.
Right.
We have
So,
to bring the husband in, right?
so
But it's
welcome.
a family name, the Welsh family name.
Right. Fantastic.
Lorwen. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, I'm English Scottish, so we've got
Well, that's what my pedigree is. English Scottish.
So I called you a big fish because you
Yeah,
are
why?
a psychologist, PhD, clinical psychologist. You also have worked with the Dalai Lama. I'm
Yeah.
going to leave the introductions to you now. Lorwen, tell us everything that everybody needs to know about Lorwen Neagle.
Oh boy. Okay, so I grew up in South Texas in a
Mhm.
ranch family, and probably never could imagine all the things that happened to me. But I ended up getting a PhD from UT Austin, University of Texas at Austin, the Longhorns. Woo!
Oh, Longhorns, right? Texas Longhorns, I
Yeah.
know.
And then I went to Harvard for my postdoc, but then before I did that, I went over to India with a boyfriend right after my PhD and went overland into Tibet and got altitude sickness on the other side of Mount Everest, had to be brought back down into Nepal, of which then my boyfriend and I went to see the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala. So that's how I started, that's how I connected with the Dalai Lama. I ended up representing the Dalai Lama in Amnesty International. So at the time, there were only 4 sentences about the Tibetans. And then 3 years later, he got the Nobel Peace Prize. So I was working with him for a long time. And then we eventually brought in Tibetans into 21 cluster sites throughout the United States. So it was one of the largest historical immigration projects in the United States. Like you, it's the best. The number one university, no, not university, but United States immigration project.
So
I think we'd be good at a bar together.
we would, in all fairness, we would. And I'm
Yeah.
when we're doing the podcast and stuff, I always tell everybody for watching this, we only spoke for 10 minutes before the podcast started. To be fair, to let everybody know, I'm
Good.
going through a journey of learning about you, Lorwen, as much as you're going to be learning about me as we go through this as well. We built a rapport quickly. I wrote down some notes because there's some fascinating things that you are an expert in, and especially when it comes to managing the mind. And we met on LinkedIn. You just commented on LinkedIn. I went, "Do you want to talk about it on the podcast?" Yeah, that was it. That is how we've met. So, which is brilliant, which is absolutely fantastic. So, Lorwen, talk to us about your learning at Harvard. Yes, you've met the Dalai Lama, you've worked with Dalai Lama, but you are definitely an expert in your field with clinical a PhD psychologist. And I asked the question for anybody who's watching this, I'm going to ask the question again. What's the difference between a psychologist and a psychotherapist? I think is what I asked.
Psychiatrist.
A psychiatrist. Thank you very much. Well done.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Okay. So a psychologist cannot prescribe medication. A psychiatrist can. And that's really the only difference. Like you asked me earlier, can psychologists diagnose? And they
Right.
do. They do. In fact, one of the things that I loved when I was getting my PhD was the Rorschach ink blot test, Of course I would because I'm also an artist, but I love the projective quality of that test. And I think it's superior to all the other kind of diagnostic tests, which is the MMPI and all these TAP. You probably don't know any of these, but the Rorschach is fantastic because what it does is that when you look at the ink blot, you start talking about the various aspects of the blot. And if you're a real skilled psychologist, you know how the person problem solves. It's fascinating. So I take that also and link it to art. So
Mm,
that's how I'm also working with my clients, is it helps me when they talk about their artwork, it helps me understand how they're problem solving emotionally
yeah,
and how they're coming to conclusions about things.
yeah,
And and that's where also the CBT reframing can come in.
yeah.
Yeah. So restructuring does take place. I
Mm,
do have ways in which people can reframe things but I like to see it in a big picture way in the imagination. So the imaginative aspects of the mind are just amazing, and they're like the Atlantic Ocean versus a little lake.
yeah. So I've got so many questions, but
Yeah.
I'm very much a keen listener to language. And you said, please tell me if I'm way off mark on this one. You said, yes, psychotherapists like they do, as in they like to diagnose, but you don't like to diagnose. That's kind of what I heard from that sentence. Am I correct in asking that? You know that there are psychologists out there that like to diagnose, but you don't.
Well, I don't, there's several things that I don't adhere to
Mm,
as a traditional
sure.
psychotherapist. Yeah. And one is that I am not focused on diagnosing. I'm also not focused on pure clinical psychotherapy. Like
Mm,
I consider myself an emotional intelligence trainer.
mm,
And that is where, so emotional intelligence, very important. If you begin to understand how to regulate your emotions, you can dance with your emotions. But if you're just focused in as a psychotherapist or traditional psychotherapist or clinician, it's caught up in licensing and continuing ed courses and I mean that's just one facet of being a traditional psychotherapist, which I don't adhere to. The other thing is that I think people they can like heal faster, and one specific way in which I do it is that I give people, once people start working with me, they have unlimited email access to me. And that points to something called the holding. So the holding introject was something Freud came up with. And it's when you're emotionally holding the person as they move through the therapy process. So
mm,
it's not like siloed, like you see the therapist and then a week later you see him again, you know, where the therapist doesn't have any idea what you've been processing.
mm.
So I allow that to be in our psychotherapy.
Fantastic. And we're going to deep dive how, because we talked about this before, and I thought it went on a great tangent of why CBT doesn't genuinely work or is as powerful
Mhm.
for trauma. We talked about that because you
Yeah,
work with the limbic system, and I work with somatic healing, EMDR, brain spotting, which is more the different side of the brain. And CBT is not as effective with trauma.
I agree.
Yeah. So talk about that, Lorwen.
Okay. So CBT, so trauma,
Yes.
let's start there. So trauma really hits the brain in a very different way and activate, and we get reactivated. So trauma has, so in as somebody who is affected, let's say childhood trauma.
Yeah.
So they grow up, they're an adult, but what happens is there's a bit of repetition compulsion. What I mean by that is that things trigger them. Somebody will do something, move a hand, say certain words to them, and it triggers this trauma response. And they repeat in themselves, I'm no good, I'm crummy, I shouldn't be alive, things like that, that are part of the repetition of the trauma.
Yeah.
So why I think CBT does not work
Hmm.
is because it is focused on thought distortions.
Yes.
So thought distortions meaning that like I just said one, like I'm no good. That's a labeling
Correct.
thought distortion. But taken as case in point, as a trauma victim,
Yeah.
the person has been traumatized, it doesn't it doesn't do them any good to say, oh yeah, to think it through logically, to say, yeah, I said I'm no good, I labeled myself, but I could label myself positively. They can't. They have to work through trauma in a very different way.
And the reason for that is CBT is very much focused on the logical part, which is the non-emotional side. And most trauma, and correct me if I'm wrong, is in the emotional part of the brain and the different part of the brain, which is where reasoning is different, which is more to the limbic system.
It is, but I wouldn't parse them out that strongly,
Perfect. Good.
because CBT, when you say it's the logic part, it is not so much. It leans in that direction, but when we do label ourselves or get into all or nothing thinking, which is very much people with trauma will get into all or nothing and catastrophizing
Absolutely.
thinking,
Because they have a
minimize.
point of reference. They have a point of reference.
Yeah.
So they know on the big scope of life, the map of life, something has gone wrong. So I have a point of reference.
Hmm.
We have the negative distortion of the brain that always fires from the negative first,
Hmm.
which will then go, but remember that time. So we forget to open up to all the other times when things didn't go wrong, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And so to the point about the CBT is that it isn't, it's gotten kind of, I think, what do I want to say? Like, shallow, by just saying
Yeah.
it's the 10 thought distortions.
Yeah.
That makes it rather shallow. And
Yeah.
and I think when you can alert somebody to an insight that they're really, and they become aware that they're catastrophizing all the time, it's still useful to somebody who's been traumatized. It may not, this is why I do not do just CBT.
Yeah.
So I think what we're referring to is, do you just give this person CBT, or do you just do? And I am not in favor of that at all.
Yeah.
I think, but there are a lot of CBT people out there, and there are also people that work OCD, and strictly, and I'm not in favor of just doing a template like
Yeah,
that.
because everyone's different. Everyone's response is different to, and you're absolutely right. I see a lot of people, well, just follow this template as a coach or a therapist. This is that, but you can't. Everyone's different. Everyone's got a different
Exactly.
conversation. Everyone's got a different life experience. So I know that we are definitely on the same because I started out doing NLP. Then
Yeah.
I went into CBT, then I went into life coaching, and I realized that a lot of it was NLP. NLP,
I was going to say,
it is.
neuro-linguistic programming is
It
fantastic.
is. NLP
It,
is amazing. Yes,
it is.
it
It
is.
really is. And it's even, I would say, more nuanced than CBT.
I would say it's more powerful than CBT. Yes,
I think so
absolutely.
too. I think so too.
It often
CBT,
feels like that CBT is a watered down version of NLP but it shows you the different thought
yeah.
viruses that we have, which are great. I've had them. CBT helped for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the other thing I was going to say about CBT is, and just historically, so I'm just going to give a little history of psychology.
Go for it. I love it.
So anyway, we come from this beginning stages in Germany, right? In the 1870s, 1890s. So it was the first psychology lab was in Berlin. And then it moves in and we get all these different, psychoanalysts like Freud, Jung, and I love Jung. Carl Jung is really, I really focus on him a lot. But then in America, especially, behaviorism became the sine qua non, the ultimate, and so CBT is a cousin, a first cousin of behaviorism. And because behaviorism is something that you can scientifically, say, yes, this happened, that's why behaviorism was so popular, which is I do not like. I don't like behaviorism because of that,
Mm.
because it's just focused on measurement. And CBT, being the first cousin of behaviorism, it just snuck in and
Mm.
became popular. And that's how it became popular in
And
my book.
it's CBT is one of those that took so long to get recognized as an approved way of helping people
Right.
with their mental health. And it took ages for CBD to get recognized. But the second CBT got recognized, it then moved on. Do you know, there's another 75 modalities of psychosensory therapies that are even more powerful than CBT. But NLP still doesn't get recognized for the powerful then. It's still a pseudoscience. And we're like, it's not a pseudoscience.
I
It's
know what you're saying. I know what you're saying. And it's true. It's true. NLP has been pushed aside as not being something, when I honestly agree with you that it is.
yeah,
It's powerful. I mean, I know I wasn't trained in NLP, but I know a lot of it,
yeah,
and I'm always amazed at how good it is.
yeah. It
So,
really is.
so it is something that I would be using, but I use everything that works.
Well, let's talk about because we
Okay.
you talked about how you use art therapy to get into, and I want to use this to you want to access the limbic system
I
with the
do.
way that you do therapy.
That's right.
So explain why you want to use the limbic system and why you find art therapy as a powerful tool to access that.
Okay. So the limbic system, let's just talk about the reptilian brain. It's the oldest part of the brain. It's also the emotional aspects are sort of centered there. And a lot of the way in which we navigate through the world is through those immediate reactions. There's also system one and two. And system one, I think maybe I have this wrong, but one is fast, one is slow.
Yeah,
And one is immediate reactivity, and
which was
that's
there to keep us
limbic.
alive.
Yeah, and that's the limbic. And what it is fight or flight,
Shooting off the
immediate,
cortisol on a daily basis for us. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's very much connected to all these vital organs of our body
Yep.
too. And
And the nervous
because
system.
of what?
And the nervous system.
And the nervous system, yes. And let's not, the second brain,
The
which is
gut.
in the gut. And all of those things get played out. I think I have access to that through the drawings that my clients do.
Yeah.
So, so, and my clients also see the power in it,
Yeah.
because so most of my clients are professionals,
Yeah.
dentists, doctors, founders of companies, those. So they're very accomplished, but they have these, some of them trauma from the past.
Mhm.
Um, like for instance, I was mentioning the neuroscientist, who wants to take her whole lab and university system stuff to the next level, but is finding that some of her overthinking, her procrastination is really dating back to childhood.
Yeah.
So, so we've got those sorts of things.
Mhm.
What kind of lost my thought?
So you
Give
are
me,
talking about why we work with the limbic system and why you are finding that art therapy is a powerful tool because you're clearly working with high level executives or powerful
yes,
people that want to move into that next level. But childhood trauma,
yeah,
which to be fair, and I'm very open and honest with this, with a lot of my clients that I was working with, trauma popped up with every one of them, and I was like, "Oh, I don't even know if CBT is going to," which is why I went down
yeah,
the rabbit hole of like, let's just do everything we can to understand how trauma affects the brain, how it affects the body. And it's funny you talked about the reptilian brain. I always come from the monkey mind brain. So it depends how you learn things, but the monkey mind is the which is why I call myself a mind management coach because the book was Stephen Peters' Monkey Mind is the quickest to react. The computer
yes.
is the slow processing one. But yeah, no, the reptilian RS1, RS2 is quick to react, and some people use that as a signal for I don't want to work with that person in life because they're too reactive. I need to work with so that quick reaction, the reptilian brain, the RS1, is absolutely really powerful within people. I was very reactive, and I can still be reactive if I know that my emotions are not where I want them to be. And I
Yeah,
think emotional awareness, which is what we're going to talk about, is going to be a big part of understanding. And I talk about this an awful lot in the podcast is maybe it's not mental health we need to be talking about, it's emotional health we need to be talking about. Because there's going to be a lot more power and people moving forward in understanding emotional intelligence. I come from a place of positive emotional intelligence, of really knowing how to drive those positive emotions more.
yeah.
And a lot of my trainings with businesses are around that. But for you to come back to you, we're talking about the limbic system. I also mentioned, I wanted to talk about that as well, is I said, but using art therapy would be a powerful way to disassociate. And you went, well, actually, yes, but no. And why is art therapy not just a disassociation tool?
Well, the term disassociation to me means that you're splitting off. You're saying I'm disassociating myself from let I'm assuming you mean from talking to visual, tactile something. Is that what you mean?
So, great question. Love how you asked and phrased that one perfectly, by the way. Wanted to know what I mean. So, for disassociation, from my understanding of disassociation, is how we disassociate through trauma. So instead
Yes.
of
Okay.
reliving that trauma and going back to it with memory, we can disassociate by going, talk to me and draw a picture about that experience. So you're disassociating
Ah,
from the trauma, and you were like, actually, no, it's not disassociation, it's this. So I found that a fascinating take because I like to learn as much as everybody else, Lorwen. So
yeah.
that's why I was talking about disassociation, how art therapy can be used as a disassociation for
So
children or adults.
yes. So put that, now I'm understanding what you mean by, I would rephrase it and say that you're disconnecting
Perfect.
uh, from the trauma uh, pathway, neural pathway, and reconnecting to visual, tactile. And the tactile is important in the drawing. People don't really talk about that, but kinesthetically, when people are drawing, they are they're engaged in different neural systems
Yeah.
that are going on. And the other thing is that you can't draw well. So nobody, I don't care if you're Michelangelo, you're not going to sit there and draw a perfect whatever that you say, I'm going to draw. And so what happens is it's so important for the person to see um, good enough. So something is good enough, and that's what a drawing is. It's good enough. And that's an important lesson for emotional regulation and emotional
Yes.
learning, is that you don't always get spot on. You're not always perfectionistic, you can't get everything A plus, but if you get it good enough and you start, you can self-soothe that way too. It's soothing to know that you've done your best, you've done good enough. And Donald Winnicott, so the Englishman that I told you about, so he was a pediatrician and then he turned psychoanalyst. So he became a Freudian analyst. But he was this um like an idiot savant or something, because he knew children so well and knew what was traumatic for
Mhm.
children.
Yeah.
And so he revolutionized psychoanalysis through his pediatric work,
Yeah.
through understanding children and how they need to hold blankets for safety and they need to be back in a safe place. And as trauma victims, we need to have safe, secure connections.
That
And
the
yeah,
emotional needs. That's Marislaw's emotional
yes.
needs. Yes, absolutely.
And the therapeutic alliance that I
Yeah.
like to work with is one of secure holding. That's why I call it the
Yes. Yeah.
holding. See, it's because in the holding, trauma can be healed. When it's fragmented, when things are fragmented, the person stays disconnected.
And that's so that and again a powerful conversation because this comes from my
Mm.
understanding as well because you talked about the default mode network.
Yes.
So when you say default mode network, do you mean the rest and digest, and do you mean the difference between clicking into fight or flight? What did you mean by the
Well,
default mode
the
network?
default mode network is has been found later when we started using MRIs.
Yeah,
So we discovered that there's this, and it got called default because, like, you're flipping back to just mind wandering. But there are two types of the default mode network goes throughout the brain, and it's where we begin to ruminate. So, trauma, you're speaking of trauma victims or
yeah,
people with trauma. They can ruminate obsessively over certain things. And that's the thing that you were talking about, taking and
yeah,
disassociating in by drawing
yeah,
or doing something visual like
yeah,
artwork. Okay, the default mode network has two ways. It's maladaptive mind wandering, which is the ruminating, and then there's a constructive mind wandering, which is the thing that I have people walking without devices. And and when they're walking for at least 30 to 45 minutes, they begin to let their mind, so it might go into the ruminating, but then it hears birds and it starts to, hear a song and in their head, and then it opens up. So I'm strengthening the constructive mind wandering of the default mode network is what my package is.
Because you talked about working with imagination,
Yes.
and I
Well,
found
I
that
think they,
fascinating because
yeah,
most people's thoughts and worries come from their imagination. So we've either got nightmares or we've got dreams. We've got
exactly.
it's all not really a matter of perception, but a matter of choice. It's the same whether it's a nightmare, but
Yeah.
the and we always it's that open conversation. Is it the brain that doesn't know any difference, or is it the mind that doesn't know any difference between truth or fact?
Uh, well, I wouldn't separate the brain and the mind because that's sort of like splitting hairs. I mean,
Correct.
that's saying
Love that.
a tomato or a tomato.
Brilliant.
So it's that we actually make up our lives.
Pretty
I
much.
think it's based in the imagination. Um, where was this? Um, there were some scientists that it was in Japan. Oh, Yokohama, Japan. They had a manifesto, and I think this was in 2015 and or 2018 maybe, where everybody started talking about the imagination, and it was ditched way back when Descartes, I think, therefore I am. That's Descartes. Okay. Well, there was a guy named Giambattista Vico who was in the same time, 1744, and he came up with the imagination and fantasia. And that's where I believe our minds rest, in the imagination. That's why we can dream big. That's why we can have dream our future self and live into it, live into that dream world. It's because it's possible, because that's where the mind is based. But we got caught in Descartes, you know, pathway of being in, reason and
I
logic.
think therefore I am
Yeah.
is that I think therefore I am goes against the rules of consciousness. I believe. I think that is that not why they've changed it to I am because I think.
Well, now, no, there was a
I know they've changed it. I know. Yeah, I know.
no, but there was another guy that so that's Descartes from the Western world,
Yeah,
right? But then there was some Oriental guy who said, I am, therefore I think. Yeah.
that's the one. I knew that it had been turned around because that consciousness it's still this ever stream of consciousness that the consciousness is there and that sometimes thought is the blocker, not the attractor.
Exactly, exactly.
Thought is
And
the blocker and not the attractor.
it can be and probably is more the blocker. Like, because just think about it. When you say, I am, Cuddy Cudworth, or I am Lorwen Neagle, and we get all into that. What are we doing but cutting off the rest of this immense infinity that we also are,
Yeah.
that we're not touching in on? We're cutting ourselves off.
And you talked about you're always wanting to connect people to and there is always a little bit of a personal bias because I'm still, as I'm on this journey of learning and understanding, I'm not 100% convinced that diagnoses are the right way forward for people. People looking for a diagnosis.
Uh, I don't think they are.
And I think that's really powerful for you to say, and I genuinely appreciate for a lovely lady of your esteemed prestige to be able to say that. I think we're on the same page for that
And the
because
reason I say that is for a couple of big reasons. One is that we were talking about cognitive CBT.
yeah,
you label yourself. And once you label, I'm bipolar.
Becomes part of
So
your
I say
identity.
I'm bipolar, and then you become you live into the world
It's
of bipolar.
identity. And there's no
Yes,
stronger force
exactly.
in the world than identity.
That's right.
That
And
becomes our jacket that we're wearing.
yes, exactly. And also the other thing that I really, and I was going to write a thread. I write lots of threads on Twitter about these things. But one is that this diagnostic statistical manual, which I mentioned to you,
Yeah.
has mutated into all sorts of things to where if you pick up your pen too much, that's a diagnosis. That's pin picking up, uncontrollable pin picking up,
True.
So it becomes silly, silly, you know, and so
Uh,
that's my A1,
Professional opinion.
yeah,
And
professional opinion.
the fact that a lady of your esteem and prestige says that they're not the preferred method for your coaching, your therapy, and your practice,
Yeah.
and for a humble me, the UK's leading mind management coach,
The number one UK mind management.
self-titled, as I always say, I find that extremely heartwarming that I
Right.
can think there's smarter people around than me that think the same as me, and I'm like, oh, that's a weight off my shoulders because and I've been doing a lot of research into to the misdiagnoses, and the really high percentages of people,
Yeah.
and for anyone watching this, is that diagnosis, and I want to really deep dive this, and Lorwen, I know you're right there with me, is identity, identity, identity. If you've been diagnosed with general anxiety disorder, GAD, or something like that, or you're a social anxiety, or you're never going to be able to be good in social circumstances. No, it's an unfortunate part that you then have an identity of something that's not yours. It's not yours to own, and you don't have to live with that.
Right. I agree.
And
I,
that's the missing picture in so many people's lives that they're walking around because linguistically they will, I'm sure you listen to this and oh, I have that, or I have that, or I have that, or I have that. And especially with the way that people do put out, oh, you could have kidney disease if you've got a twitchy eye, a little grey lung, you've got a bad knee and you urinate 3 times in the night. I thought I had kidney disease. It turned out I hadn't. I just got a gluten intolerance, and I'm just like, oh my God. If you'd been looking at these things of saying, which is what pops up now for ADHD, or if you've got this,
yeah.
you'll be ADHD, and
The
it
other thing
must be so
about
frustrating for people. Go for it.
yeah. Well, the other final thought about labeling and diagnosis is that it makes you into a hypochondriac. I mean, a lot of this mental or emotional hypochondriac. Let's put it that way,
Love that.
because the tendency is to kind of over analyze yourself, and 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 also it's a little too um focused on the me. I have this and this, so that too doesn't help to have a happy life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the authentic self,
Yes.
it
So
is so scary for people to be. And why is it so? I think the question is, why is it so scary for people to be their authentic self? Is it because they don't know who their authentic self is? They've not been able to connect to that authentic self? How do you perceive that? Or how do
well,
you see that, Lauren?
how I see it is it becomes vulnerable. So so what happens is the ideal self or the false self, which is mostly it's what we cues that we get that we should act a certain way. And we usually get this growing up.
Hmm.
And so we kind of hide that true self because it's vulnerable. So the bottom line is it's just really vulnerable. You just don't want to feel like somebody can squash you, so you'd rather put on a bravado or something else instead of show this part of you. So when we're growing into our authentic self, which I think we all do all our lives,
Mm,
we're growing into who we are,
hmm.
really who we are. And that is our authentic self. And so when we're doing that, we touch in on vulnerable spots, places where we feel, open and
Yeah,
like somebody could hurt you.
absolutely.
Yeah. So that's part of the reason I think that we hide our true selves.
Do we think we hide the dark self?
That's an interesting question.
It is an interesting question because I know I've spoke to my wife about certain things, and I'm like, I do have a dark side. She went, no, you've just been suppressing you've been nice for too long, I think is her exact words. You've
All
been
right.
nice and
So So saying that you've been nice for too long, that niceness is the false self in my book.
Mhm.
See,
I love it.
it's the ideal, it's nice so you got in your head, I got to be nice, I got to be compliant, I have to be people pleasing or whatever. I don't know how it comes out
Trauma
for you.
responses, right? Trauma responses, every one of them tick the box.
Uh, but that is your ideal self.
Mhm.
Your wish, and then underneath it is this, you call it the dark self, but it's your real self. And it's once it has a little oxygen, it can, it says, oh, here I am, it's happy. And so it's not dark.
I love that. I love
Yeah,
that. It's funny because I've worked with a couple of clients with it as well, and funnily enough, I have the same kind of conversations with them. Like, why are we scared to showcase that part of
yeah,
us that we think is? I'll use Scottish words, crabbit, or
rabbit.
crabbit. It's crabbit. It's like a little crabbit.
I, yeah.
Um, the anger, the frustration, and in a world, and again, when it comes to, I was, and I'll let's share your thoughts on this and on
Okay.
negativity.
I didn't realize how late it is, but
Or do you
I'm
have
gonna
to go?
right in another 5 minutes.
Fine.
Is share my thoughts on which.
Share your thoughts on negativity, because negativity surely is just comes from a place of perspective. One person's negativity is another person's positivity.
Yeah. But we all know, let's look at it this way. It's not, you know, everybody has a negative side to them.
Absolutely.
And they get depressed and they get
Yeah,
down on themselves. Mostly people get down on themselves more than other people.
correct.
They say, I'm a shit, I'm crummy,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So the question is, you're asking me, what is the negativity?
The
What was the
negativity for
question?
one person can often, they might think they're being positive, but for somebody else, they'll think that's really negative.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. So I think that is again part of our growing up.
Mhm.
Because and part of the triggering. So, when we get triggered by certain things, like it could be that one person says, like my husband's from New England, and he goes, "Oh, good for you." And I always think, "What the hey?" I don't know what "good for you" means. I think it's a kind of corny phrase, but it's, it's supposed to be in New
And some
England.
people would say condescending, right? Oh, good for you. Good
I
for
know,
you.
but see, yeah, but see, like what we're saying, that if for somebody like me, I'm insulted,
Yeah,
like. Yeah. And for him, he thinks that it's like being, oh, so sweet and, telling you that you're a good person or whatever, you know. So anyway, that's sort of a perspective on that. One person has a negative and the other one thinks it's positive.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Well, Lorwen, I think
Yes.
this was a fascinating podcast. I'm a big believer if it's in the mind, it can be managed. And we touched on some fantastic touch points today, Lorwen.
Yeah.
I
Thank
would
you.
I would consider this a fantastic networking opportunity for both of us because that's the reason we do the podcast is we get
Yeah.
to meet other esteemed, powerful, connected, well-taught people that we can share that message with. And I think you absolutely did that today, Miss Nagel. So thank you so much.
Thank
Is there
you.
anything else you want to share on the Mind Management Mentors podcast?
Well, people can follow me on Twitter, and it's at Lorwen108, and then also on LinkedIn, and that's Lorwen Harris Nagel,
I love it.
LinkedIn. So
Harris is a
thank
Scottish
you.
term. Harris is a very Scottish name. Very, very Scottish. I love that. Lauren, it
Well,
was an
that's my
absolute
maiden
pleasure.
name.
Sorry if I didn't mean
Okay.
to overtalk you there, but it's a pleasure to be to have you
Thank
on the
you
Mind
so
Management.
much, and thank you, Cuddy, for
Not
doing
a
this.
problem. I hope
That's
you've enjoyed it
amazing.
as much as I did.
I
Um,
did, really
good.
did.
Fantastic. You have a
Great. So you'll
fantastic day.
send me this,
Oh,
right?
I'm going to do all the editing and send you everything that you need, the links and
Okay, and
everything.
then I'll put it on my sites.
Perfect. As always, big love from
Uh,
Cuddy, and we will see
Thank
you in
you,
the next
Cuddy.
episode.
Okay, bye.